They said it was criminal. Because this is 1891, there were still people around who had lived through that 15-year drought. And they said, what are you doing? Well, my grandfather came and homesteaded. So there's my grandpa disking the prairie sod in the homestead. And not great farming practices, but of course, they didn't know anything else. Plus, his fiance was coming out. And I'm sure he's thinking, I got to get a crop and I got to get some income and I got to build a shed. Otherwise, my fiance isn't going to come out west. She eventually did. And of course, the 1930s came along and the homestead blew away. So like a lot of homesteaders, they had to move into the parkland where they thrived. There's my grandpa stooking wheat in the farm where I spent the summers as a kid. And of course, the consequence of the 1930s was stuff like this. Now, in terms of meteorology, those droughts weren't really that bad, but the farming practices were terrible. I mean, there were a couple of really dry years, like 37, 31. But 1988, 2001, 2021 were just as bad as the 1930s. But farming practices were so much better that you didn't see this in 2021, or I didn't see it. And as a result of all of that soil degradation up until about the 1980s, here's a map of the world showing in red all the degraded soils. And of course, throughout the Western Plains, a lot of degraded soil, and up into Canada, soil which is thinner and less fertile and less organic matter content than nearby native prairie Chernozem. That's what this study determined. So there's actually an opportunity. This created an opportunity whereby farmers today have a chance to regenerate or restore the fertility of these soils because people like my grandparents degraded the soil. And I don't fault them for doing that. They were just, okay? So this is the part of my talk, just a few slides, where I don't really need to talk because this audience knows the means by which the soil health can be restored. I got this from your website, Mike. Fantastic stuff at your website. Principles of soil. I don't need, in fact, I don't have to endorse regenerative agriculture because I'm not a producer. I'm not in that business. But I can say that it makes perfect sense if you look at the future climate we expect. Okay, so if you want to be resilient and prepared for that future climate, this seems like a good solution from the perspective of climate science. And the whole concept of regenerative agriculture fits nicely within the concept of nature-based solutions. So nature-based solutions, working with nature, restoring, protecting, creating, or regenerating. There's a lot of compatibility between regenerative agriculture and the broader domain, if you will, of nature-based solutions. So I'm in the business of climate change and climate adaptation, and nature-based adaptation is being promoted as an alternative to industrial scale geoengineering of the earth. And you know, and just a couple more slides. A few years ago, I saw this article in 2018 in the magazine Alberta Farmer. Okay, regenerative agriculture, sounds cool. And then the same magazine, 4 years later, is all the rage. Really? I thought, is all the rage? I think there's just a few radical producers that are jumping on the bandwagon. Well, as it turns out, At the same time, I was asked to speak at the Western Canadian Conference on Soil Health and Grazing, which was held in Edmonton 2 months later. And so I thought, okay, I'll put together a presentation and I'll go into some ballroom, hotel room in Edmonton, and there'll be a few radical ag producers. I went there, there were 450 people in the room, and it was sold out. They had to turn away a lot of ag producers and agronomists. And I stuck around. I didn't just give my talk and get out of there. I stuck around for the whole conference and heard a whole series of really cool presentations by ag producers and agronomists about why this is a good idea. And something else I found influential was books like these. If you're like me, you got a bunch of books on your bookshelf you never read. So I've yet to read the two on the right. But Christmas 2018, my wife gave me Gabe Brown's book. It had just been published, and I couldn't put it down. I felt sorry for our kids and grandkids. Well, we didn't have grandkids yet. Grandkids were just about there, but our kids, I felt sorry for them because I was engrossed in this book at Christmas time, but I couldn't put it down. And the book on the right, I haven't read, but I quote it because there's a passage in that book that I've seen that points out that humus or humus and human have the same root. And so that restoring healthy soil is one of the best investments we can make in humanity's future. The answer is right at our feet. Okay, so again, I'm not here to promote regen agriculture. I don't have to this crowd, and it's not my business, but I'll say it one more time, it makes perfect sense as an adaptation to climate change.